Good afternoon, everybody, or evening, I guess. Hope everybody's day is going well. As I get started today, I wanted to go over just a couple of little things. I'm going to be narrowing my lives down to one live a week that's scheduled. Hi, baby girl. So one scheduled live a week on Wednesday at noon Pacific Standard Time. Again, it'll always be co-streaming over on YouTube so that you can watch it on YouTube later. Excuse me. And it won't be the only live I'm doing. It's just going to be my only scheduled live. I'm finding that I'm putting way too many of my spoons into this instead of into the other avenues of things that I've got going on. I have a couple of books that I'm working on, and I'm doing so much of this that I can't even put out videos because it's too much social media for me, and I'm not a social media person. And this was never intended for me to turn into any influencer or to, have that social media presence, because it just doesn't work very well for my very off-grid, backwoods kind of brain. So I am going to narrow it down. Hello, love. It does not mean that I won't be doing more lives. It just means that will be my only obligated scheduled live. I have a children's book written that I'm doing the art for right now. And I want to put some spoons into that. And then I want to put some spoons into, I actually have a book that I've been working on for a couple of years and trying to get it put together, which is basically a novel based on an archaeological find. And so I'm trying to put that together too. And I just want to be able to put my spoons into some other shit. And mainly also, I don't want to be an influencer. I don't want people to know my face on the street, and I don't want to have that constant interaction just because it doesn't work very well for my brain. I love people and I love interacting with people, but it can be very much a lot for me. And I don't do social media. Like anybody who knows me knows I barely have a Facebook account. Like I have a Facebook account and I'll be gone from it for like a year, 2 years, come back. So it's just not, there's a cat hair on my nose. It just doesn't work very well for me. So that doesn't mean I won't be around. I'll probably be putting out more videos actually, because I'll have the opportunity to, and the spoons too. It just means I won't be doing 4 lives a week. I'll be narrowing it down to that singular live scheduled on Wednesday at noon Pacific Standard Time. Probably be in just randomly on other things. That's awesome. Those will still be up. I'll still be recording all of the lives on the YouTube channel. Like I'm currently streaming on YouTube right now as well, which is the YouTube behind me on the screen for those who do not know. And I'll currently have that availability. I just feel like it'll give me more availability to actually do some of the stuff. Like people are like, I want a video on this and I'd like a video on that. And what's your opinion on this? And I'm like, I don't have the spoons. Like I do the lives and I shut down on TikTok because I can't even focus on it for a while because it's just too much for my very disconnect nature connect brain, like the social media aspect of it. Like I can connect really well even in large groups, but when it becomes like this isn't a great like really deep connection, and it just, and I also get too many things coming at me at once. So but I will still be around. It's just going to be my only scheduled, and I have some other stuff in the works that will be coming up soon. And what we'll do is we'll just study random stuff over the course of, or bring new finds in, things that seemed cool that I had looked at and seen. This is actually, I've been asked several times, what is our last common ancestor, or what is the original common ancestor? People have asked me, like, what's the first of the last common ancestors? Like, what did we all of, not just humanity, but like animals and trees and all that descend from? And I don't think anybody's identified that. And I had talked about the fact that I knew like an older primate during the Jurassic period, but I didn't really know like a last common ancestor between us and other great apes. And I did bring in what I had seen about a possible missing link last common ancestor, or kind of like, that point of convergence between us and chimpanzees. But I was scrolling through TikTok, and I think it was Brown Girl's Pride, but I can't remember if it was that account or it was a different account that they have. I know it was that person, I believe. So they were talking about Elise, which is the skull behind me. And Elise is an infant skull from the Miocene. It's 13 million years ago. And this is that idea we have of a last common ancestor between us and the other great apes. And that makes her a very, well, this baby, a very beautiful, an amazing find that we have. And I had not found about it or heard about it. The articles were published in 2017, and the find is from 2014, I believe, um, which was not a time and a space that I had a lot of ability to do a lot of interaction on things that I was really passionate about, anyways, outside of raising children. So it's not surprising that I didn't know about it. But um, I often try and make sure everybody knows that I'm only giving you the stuff that I know. Like it might change tomorrow, and there might be stuff that I find out differently tomorrow. That pattern's really weird on that screen, doesn't it? Thank you, Sugar Pie. I totally forgot to flip it. I'm gonna switch this shirt out. That pattern's really weird on that screen, and it looks very like almost weird eye like thing. Give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. That sweater seemed to pattern out like those weird pictures that you look at and you look cross-eyed and you get a weird picture out of it. So I wanted to make sure that it wasn't fucking with people's eyesight. Um, so this is one of those evidences of things that I didn't know about. That's really, really cool. There are often things. That's why I invite people to bring in, like, if I'm saying something wrong and because you have evidence, please tell me, right? Like, or if I don't know something that you've seen, please tell me. Because, like, I'm learning too. It's supposed to be a learning journey for all of us. I don't want to be the person that knows everything because that's a lot, a lot of pressure and a lot of knowledge, right? So, oh, thank you. We don't know what an infant skull from 12 million years ago was as gender choice. Our idea that gender is something that society needs to be defined is so new that the thought process would be that there's nothing that old that thought of the need to think, oh, you're female and I'm male, because it didn't predict ownership based on that. And so if you don't predict ownership based on what gender somebody else perceives you to be, there is no need for an idea of what gender is, right? The eye sockets look huge. You're so correct. So this article is on my website, the widdaord.com website. It is under this week, and it's the top one under this week. I also put an article on Graciopithecus freybergi, which is another one that we've talked about in here, that possible missing link between us and chimpanzee. But this is the top article. The Graciopithecus freybergi is underneath. And they're saying that this is most likely a cousin of the species that we and the other great apes descend from. The name Elise is a Turkana word for ancestor, and I may be pronouncing it wrong. This is just what I'm getting off of. Oh, I am so sorry. I really do have cat hair like everywhere today. Ah, I have 3 long hairs, and then we're babysitting somebody else's cat who's also long hair um, in a tiny little apartment. So, as you can imagine. Um, but yes, They do keep them up in here. It's all up in here, right? Yeah, it is. And you can actually tell. So with this baby, they know from where the teeth are in those cavities. They can see the growth rings because human beings have growth rings in their teeth, or animals, primates, like animal species have growth rings in their teeth, like trees have growth rings, right? And you can actually see starvation periods in the growth rings of the teeth. And since they are looking at the growth rings of the teeth, they can rate how old this child was when this child died. And this child was like, I think it's like 485 days or 1 year and 4 months old. And it's all because of the unerupted adult teeth that are all up in here. And as they're forming up in here, they're forming those tree rings, right? Those rings in their teeth. Uh, they have the bony ear tubes in the skull that act as a balance for primatologists. And primatologists have are act as a balancing organ for primates. And primatologists have long debated whether this specific genus, which is the Zapithecus, nine Zapithecus genus, was an ape line or a monkey line. But the presence of the tube combined with the size and the shape of the teeth mark this genus or this species within the genus, because the species is Alysi and the genus is Nyanzapathicus, um, uh, as apes. So within the ape line. Um, with the ear tube present, there's also strong evolution evidence that it's an evolutionary cousin to the ancestral line of apes from which both humans and all living apes descend from. So, like, it's they're not stating that they think that this is the species that we come from, but that it's the cousin of the species. So the same genus, like Homo is our genus. So this is the Neanderthal to our sapien, right? And so it's not necessarily that it itself is our ancestor, but that it's in that space of our ancestry, right? Because Neanderthal is actually also part our ancestor, right? Because we all have some Neanderthal within us, except for those spaces within Africa that do not. Again, only being two spaces and groups of people within Africa. Um, so, what this does tell us is the idea that the last common ancestor goes back this far and is in Africa. There's this huge argument that's being had as to whether or not um, ancient primate species that we descend from were in Eurasia and then moved into Africa, um, but didn't move into Africa until after 7 million years ago. Or if um, there are the ancestral great apes that we both descend from in Africa and in Eurasia at the same timelines, or if they start in Africa, if they go to Eurasia, there is this constant argument. We've talked about these kinds of arguments before. Most of these arguments are based on the idea that if we remove the ancient homeland of all Oh, thank you so much. If we remove the ancient homeland of all human beings from Africa and put it in Eurasia, then white people are somehow again supreme, right? Like it removes that origin thought, right? So when we replace this origin thought and we show that light skin isn't an evolution forward, it's not an evolutionary advantage, so it's not like light skin is evolved from dark skin, and we remove all of these thought processes, is taking a rung out of the ladder of racism, taking a rung out of the ladder of otherism, taking a rung out of the ladder of racism, taking a rung out, and every time we do it, there's an argument and a pushback, right? There's got to be that constant argument and that pushback, that constant thought process that that if we can disprove, or if the allowance of the disapproval of the idea of white supremacy is allowed, that these people will somehow be less, right? Which I personally think comes from that egotism that we currently have, and this idea that we're all this step above from the rest of the world and all this step out of the rest of the world, right? Um, and it is definitely something that we see that traces through Western thought, and it is definitely something that we see that comes with that need to not just be another one of the animals on this planet, another one of the beings on this planet, but instead be better than the other animals, right? So that there is this right to destroy that which we are better than, right? Which starts with the idea that we're better than the animals and moves into the idea that we're better than other human beings, right? Possibly, Hannah. I do believe in the possibility of mermaids. I do. I have no evidence, right? But I also believe that unicorns were real, right? I believe that Bigfoot exists. Believe that the giants were real. We've proven that the hobbits and the dwarves were real, right? So yes, I think anything is possible. Um, some things are more probable than others, right? But I don't see any improbability in mermaids, especially considering all the other things that we've seen. So, well, you can believe that. I mean, nobody's telling you can't believe that. She asked if I believed. And you're allowed to believe what you're allowed to believe, just like I'm allowed to believe what I allowed to believe. I absolutely said, do I have evidence of it? No. Um, wasn't claiming that it was a scientific thought process. I absolutely said believe. You believe that, well, most people believe that there's a God, right? And I don't see a scientific thought process besides that, right? And you still have that belief thought process. Many people believe that capitalism saves, and there's no scientific thought process behind that, and it has done everything but. So it's a belief, right? I'm allowed to believe in things, um, especially if I am very forthright about the fact that I have no scientific backing. It's a belief, right? But uh, I don't think, it really has anything to do with what else we're looking at, right? When we're looking at the fact that we're seeing that our last common ancestor in this case, or our most ancient of this line in this case, is absolutely in Africa 13 million years ago, using a dating technique that is extremely accurate. It's not carbon 14 dating. I have to find the name of it again because I'm horrible with names of dating techniques. Uh, the Noble Gas Laboratory in Rutgers uh, uses a dating technique measuring argon isotopes, which decay at a fixed predictable rate within the fossil's rock layer, revealing that at about 13 million years ago, revealing that it was about 13 million years ago. This is at the time when Turkana Basin is a lush rainforest. There's no reason not to. And people believe myths and legends all the time, and all the time, myths and legends are proven to be true. Time and time again, in fact, things that Western thought has relegated to being a myth and a legend has been proven to be true, especially when we look at things like shield maidens, right? Western thought that that was a myth and a legend and didn't actually exist, right? Well, you can have your own opinion. What we don't do in here is bash people for their opinions, unless their opinions are harmful and hateful towards others, in which case we just tell them to leave or educate them better. Um, so, besides the fact that you're distracting from the topic of conversation with something that's made up as far as you believe, so why are you turning a scientific discussion into a discussion about whether or not something exists when I just stated it was a belief? When we're looking at this with this, absolutely, Tony. So Homo sapiens originated in Africa, but other hominids did not necessarily. It's a pretty positive and good question. So, Homo erectus is the grandfather species of Homo sapien and Homo neanderthal and Homo denisovian and Homo florensis and Homo luzonensis. Um, and really, any species that Homo sapien had the possibility of mixing with, of living together and creating children with, right? Um, and so Homo erectus originates in Africa. And our knowledge is that they originate in South Africa. This is our current knowledge. And our current knowledge is about 2 million years ago. We do have knowledge that they leave Africa rather swiftly, 200,000 years into their time as a species. But 1.8 million years ago, we see our tooth outside of Africa in Greece. I think it's Greece, right? Down in that Mediterranean area. But this came out over the news like 6 months ago or 5 months ago, and everybody was like all excited about it. Oh my God, humans outside of Africa 2 million years ago. Um, yes, it's a Homo species. It's Homo erectus. So it's absolutely human because Homo means human, but it is not Homo sapien outside of Africa. Um, erectus leaves Africa themselves. They have the expediently bipedal traits that we have that we inherited from them. When they leave Africa themselves, they take these traits everywhere and they speciate into different species and different groups. And what speciation is an isolation and an adaptation to the environment around you, right? And these are all Homo species because all of these species are all descendant of Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, okay? And because of that, they're all human. So Neanderthal is human, Denisovian is human, Florensis is human. We also know of 5 ghost species that we lived with and bred with and mixed with because we see them in our DNA. You might have seen things like this come across the news recently when they're talking about identifying different ghost species in different areas. There is the Oyo population of West Africa that has no Neanderthal DNA, but they have 3 ghost species within them. And then the Kwe population of South Africa, which has no Neanderthal DNA. All the genetics of the human species of Homo sapien is absolutely present. Like every human genome genetic possibility is absolutely present in the Kwai people, which is also why we know that they are the original population, right? They are the population that Homo sapien all comes from. Um, and they have 3 ghost species in them. And then Indigenous Australians have a ghost species in them, and Turtle Island Indigenous people have a ghost species in them. The other 2 species that we see in our DNA are Neanderthal and Denisovian, which are the only species outside of ourselves that are Homo species that we have DNA for. We haven't been able to get DNA out of the other species that we see in the fossil record, like Nalati, Florensis, Longi, or Lozonensis. Yes, right. We haven't gotten a DNA for them. I do not know, Zorn. I do not know if Maori do. Um, I do believe it is just Australian indigenous to the continent, but not sure. Homo erectus, to our best knowledge, starts as black, but we also know that, or dark of skin, but we also know that the genes for light skin start in Homo erectus, and this came across the news in the last like 3 weeks, actually, maybe a month, where they identified that they have traced when the earliest gene for light skin happened, and it's 900,000 years old, and it's in Homo erectus, and then it comes into Neanderthal and Homo sapien. Please, though, I want to make sure that people understand that the very dark to the very light that we see today is not present in the older populations. So you're not going to see, well, maybe the very darker skin tones, but definitely not the very lighter skin tones. And when we talk about a population being predominantly a certain shade or a certain phenotypical population, we do not mean that that is the only phenotypes within a population. What we're saying is that over 50% of the population is this. You want to take a look at what somebody means by predominantly, but over 50% of the population is a specific phenotype, and under 50% is a mixture of other phenotypes. Science. I know that through science. Those are all scientific journal articles. How can I possibly know how light-skinned Neanderthals were in Europe? Through the DNA testing that they've done on Neanderthals. Uber light, the almost translucent, to my knowledge, at this point of time, from what I have read and understand, yes. Um, and that is because people have been living in those spaces for much longer periods of time than people had before, even with the Neanderthals, because that comes because, first of all, I want you to understand that uber light skin is not just European Arctic, but it is also Eurasian or Asian Arctic, and it is also Arctic and Turtle Islander. Okay. So all of those spaces in the Arctic have uber light skin naturally. Okay. Because that is an adaptation for that region. We also know that the Arctic in Europe, Scandinavia, is settled by two different groups of people at 7,000 years old. One of those groups of people is dark skinned with light eyes, which is the present day main Scandinavians, right? And the other group of people is light of skin with brown eyes, which is a Finno-Ugric group, which is the population that is currently Sami and Finn people within those Scandinavian regions. So you can see that people who are Sami or Finn have not actually gotten a whole lot lighter over the 7,000 years, whereas people who settled who were darker skin and blue of eye have gotten predominantly lighter, like very light. And what it is that we see that every 100 generations is it takes 100 generations for an adaptation to take effect, like fully to like be a majority of the population. And because it takes about 100 generations for an adaptation to become a majority of a population, and we have 25 years is the average lifespan for Homo sapiens. We know it's 25 years is the average lifespan. 2,500 years is the average time it takes for genetic adaptation to happen, or an environmental adaptation to happen. And we know at 7,000 years ago, you're looking at dark skin. We know at about 5,000 years ago, you're looking at about 50% of the population is becoming light of skin. And we know that at about 2,000 years ago, you're looking at about 70 to 80% of the population is light of skin. And then in about 1,000 years ago, even Egil and the sagas being dark of skin, you see that roughly 10% of the population is still dark of skin. Um, and so this is all stuff that they've traced through genetics and through science and doing DNA tests and doing ancient DNA tests and all these new tools that science have come out with within the last 20 years since we've had ancient DNA working for us, right? And since we've had the ability to test ancient DNA. And because we have all these new tools, since we've had the ability to test ancient DNA, we're absolutely seeing that our knowledge is moving forward in leaps and bounds. What we were absolutely positive of 10 years ago, we now know is completely incorrect. 10 years ago, we absolutely thought that it was the size of the brain that was the developing factor of intelligence. And the fact that we were also much better than the other species was because our brains were larger. Even though that we knew 10 years ago that Neanderthals' brains were actually on average larger, right? But we still thought that our intelligence comes from the size of our brain. 6 months ago, we realized that it's when we turned our brain into a fully globular, going from this, because this is the shape of early Homo sapien brains, to this, which is the modern brain shape that finalizes at about 40 to 30,000 years ago. This is the shape that gives us the intelligence that we have, and it is that that gives us our burial of dead and our ability of identity, or our thought of identity. And until 2 months ago, we thought that we were the first species to ever have any of those things on this planet. And 2 months ago, Lee Berger published his work on Homo naledi in the Rising Star Caves in South Africa. And we realized that we developed it 300,000 years ago. Homo naledi lives from 335,000 years ago to 235,000 years ago. And Homo naledi lives in the same area that we live as we're developing. Like they're there when we start and they die shortly after we come onto the scene by, like, what is that? 65,000 years, right? My math may be wrong, but I think that one might actually be right. Um, and because of that, what we see is that Homo naledi actually had the same brain case shape that we have, but Homo naledi is an Australopithecine upper body, and their size of their brain is Australopithecine, right? But we're seeing that Homo naledi is burying their dead in a ritualistic burial that we don't see again for another 200,000 years, right? And we see that Homo naledi is transporting fire through cave tunnels and cooking in caves that they don't have their dead buried, and then sitting with their dead with fire, right? And we have like three other things. Sorry about that. We have like three other things that Lee is promising to put out, right? Absolutely. I'm sorry, love. I was not paying attention at all. There is a ghost species in Turtle Island indigenous DNA, and we have not figured out what that ghost species is. The thing with ghost species is that we're not going to figure out what they are until we find the species in the fossil record and are able to extract DNA from the species in the fossil record. So, if the species that we find in the fossil record is not like Homo naledi, we can't get DNA out of Homo naledi because Homo naledi is in a hot and humid environment, because the caves that Homo naledi were in were wet, not because it's constantly humid down there, but it's a hot environment as well. Same thing with Florensis. We'll never get DNA out of them. But if we're able to get DNA out of another species and it matches the DNA that we see a fingerprint of in us, this is when we discover what these ghost species are. We won't know until then, though. And that's why there's no scientific news as to what the species is. There's news as to the fact that we see, yes, Wyatt, consumption of fat also improves brain function and growth. And absolutely, we see that it is Homo erectus doing this that gives us the big brains that we have. So Homo erectus used science because Homo erectus had fire. And it is the keeping of fire and the understanding of how to control fire that gives us the ability to cook our food, which is pre-digestion of our food, which gives us the ability to process fats better, which gives neonates and small children who are those of us in brain development phases, all of that excess caloric from fats goes directly to the brain, which creates the larger brains and creates the faster neurons firing. And because of this, Homo erectus creates us out of science. Next time somebody tells you it was ancient aliens, tell them it was Homo erectus who created you. It was not the Nephilim, it was Homo erectus. Um, but we absolutely see that there are absolutely ways that these early species are absolutely, contributing to our growth getting in the way. But we're also seeing within this last 10, 15 years, God, even within the last 5 years, the amount of information that has come out about ancient species in the last 5 years and the amount of paleoanthropological information that has come out within the last 5 years is so beyond stunning. It's not even funny. Like, it just explodes the mind, right? Discovering that a species who was around before us had a development, an advancement that we thought was uniquely ours and that we didn't get for another 200,000 years blows the mind, right? Because it takes us from that egotistical place again, right? Currently, within this Western thought process, we're sitting in this egotistical place that separates us, that states that there's no way I descended from an ape. Nobody's telling you descended from an ape. You descended from Homo erectus, which looks just as human as you do, right? Um, but we are all animals. And if we're not all animals, why do you why do you have to be special and unique, right? Do you need this to be a gift given to you to destroy? Because how we treat this planet that we think of as a gift is pretty bad, right? If instead we're looking at it as we are just another animal, just another part of nature. First of all, I creation stories are true. Every creation story that we have is proven true by science. Because if you hear every creation story at its root, every creation story, even monotheic creation stories, talk about other deities. Yahweh was part of a pantheon. He was married to his wife Asherah, okay? And he had Enlil, who was his brother, and all of these people he was fighting when he decided to choose the Judaic people, okay? So, um, even in monotheistic religions, we see other deities, okay? And in every faith that we see that while we are created, there are other beings that are already there as we're being created, right? Every every story that I so far have heard from around the world um, that talks about being unique to a space, even these stories match up with the scientific terminology. Now, when you look at, I heard a story that I'm told is the story of the Quay people. Their origin story, they are created, and it didn't go into depth about how they were created, but it talked about them being created in this space. And there are other groups of humans in other spaces, and the descendants within the other spaces of the other groups of humans created within those spaces are Europeans, Australians, Asians, Turtle Islanders, right? So when you look at that scientifically, that's pretty true, okay? Because as the Khoi people are being created, the earliest Homo sapiens that we have, the earliest of us, is being created in South Africa. Neanderthal lives in Eurasia, and Denisovian lives in Eurasia. Naladi lives next door, right? You got Florensis and Lizonzensis. You've got a ghost species in Australia and a ghost species in Turtle Island. So as the Quay people are, as the original Homo sapiens are coming into being, there are other Homo species out there, and those other Homo species have um, become a part of every part of the Homo species. Of the Homo sapien species, except for the Quay people and the Oyo people, right? So, yes, that makes perfect logical scientific sense. Nothing about that says wrong, right? When you look at Turtle Island Indigenous people who talk about being created here, that they were created here, right? When you look at this story of creation and you match this to the 130,000-year-old Cerruti Macedon find, which would be a Homo erectus speciation here in Turtle Island, right? And you match that to the ghost species within Turtle Island indigenous DNA, which would state that when Homo sapiens come here after having spent time in Asia, because they get Denisovian DNA, which is also present in Turtle Island indigenous people, that when they get here and they meet with the species that is speciated here, the Homo species that is here, that is their cousins, now, all these other species are so small by the time we meet with them that we really envelop them when we take them in. The Denisovians, we really envelop. The Neanderthals, we didn't kill off. There's like 10,000 left when we meet them. And to get the amount of Neanderthal DNA that we have, we had to have sex with every single one of them 10,000 people. Literally, to get the amount of Neanderthal DNA we have. They say to get the 0.02 to 0.03% of Denisovian DNA that Turtle Island indigenous people have, that it took 10,000 years of living with and breeding with, mixing with the Denisovian people, right? So if that's 10,000 years to get 5% Neanderthal DNA, that means that pretty much the last of the Neanderthals become enveloped within the early Homo sapiens, right? So when you see that the Turtle Island indigenous people envelop the Homo sapiens coming into Turtle Island, envelop the species of Homo erectus that is speciated here into them because they are dying off because they're so small of a species, right? Because again, as Homo, and we've talked about this before, but if you haven't been here, as Homo erectus moves out, it's taking progressively less genetics with it so that the species that come from it don't have a lot of genetic diversity to create larger species. We see with this that envelopment of that indigenous group that is here in Turtle Island, that species here in Turtle Island gives absolute truth to Turtle Island indigenous stories that say that they were created here because they are that group. They are the descendants of that group. Yes, they're Homo sapiens. Absolutely. We are all Homo sapiens. Every single one of us, it doesn't matter what admixture we have, and we all have admixture. Even the species that don't have Neanderthal have those three ghost species. We all have admixture, right? But thank you. When we look at this and when we see this and we sit within this, we understand that all creation stories have truth. Science doesn't debunk them. So don't be afraid of it. Science is not telling you that Yahweh didn't choose you. Science is not telling you that he didn't. I personally believe that we come from the mother. We come from the earth, okay? That the earth itself is responsible for the evolution of the biome of the earth, right? That the mother is responsible for the species that walk her surface, because the species that walk her surface she nourishes and she provides for, and they provide for her, they give back, right? There's this give and take between all of the different species within the biome, right? And we see this and we somehow think that we're above and beyond that, but I personally believe that the mother, that the earth creates us, that evolves us, okay, so that we can tend, so that we can adapt the biome for the benefit of the entire biome where it is needed, so that we can prune the plants, so that we can prune the animal species as they need to be pruned, right? So that we can continue to move within the biome, hello degree, and be a part of this beautiful intertwine, right? Even that is creation. Even that is evolution, right? In this story, in this process of thought, you get both creation. I believe that the earth creates us. I believe in the earth as a mother being. I believe in the earth as a being. I feel that the earth has a soul that I can feel and interact with. Okay. Even the mother creates us. We've evolved to fit within the biome, right? And you can see that the creation works and the science works. And they are just different verbiages for the same thing. You have to look at creation stories at what they are really stating. You have to hear the origin of the story and hear what it's saying, and then look at the science. And once you do that, you can absolutely see where they're all true. All true. They're all our ways of explaining. We like to think of history as having magic, right? As witches practice magic, right? No matter what society that you're in, those who are deemed by this verbiage, though that verbiage changes depending on society, practice magic throughout history. But when we look at specifically the witches, witch being the latest etymology of a word that is the ancient Celtic word for science, for scientists who study feminine knowledge, Widda, okay, which is in my name. When we look at this, we see that the Widda and the Druids, oak, Drew, Wid, knowledge, Druid. When we look at the Widda and the Druids, what they were studying was medicine. What they were studying was the world. science. They were questioning, they were digging deeper, they were experimenting, and then they were teaching, right? And they had a lot of advanced medicine. There's a lot of advanced medicine in all indigenous groups, right? Excuse me. And when we look at this, we see that we think of the witches as practicing magic. And the witches probably were thought of as practicing magic to some extent by the people around them, but that is because magic was the word for energy. Magic was the word for science. Magic was the word for the quest for understanding because they couldn't see it in any other way, right? Now we understand that when a doctor heals through the use of herbology and science, that it is not, well, and it is still very magical, right? It is still very magical, but we understand it in specific words. And so we feel that we have removed the magic from it. And so we ignore what magic truly is, right? And so when we look at things like creation stories, we absolutely see that science and creation stories go hand in hand. You just have to look at the words for what they are. Same thing as earlier. Do I believe in the mermaids? I do. Do I have facts? No. But I think it's a possibility. And I think most possibilities and probabilities are probable, you know. Um, and looking at all the other developments, it's absolutely a probability, right? We absolutely have hobbits and we absolutely have dwarves. And island giganticism and island dwarfism tells me as an anthropologist that any species of Homo erectus that makes it to Turtle Island and species is most likely a gigantic species. That's what island giganticism and island dwarfism, the science behind species migration and isolation tells me, right? So giants are not only a possibility, but a probability, right? Um, when we look at the different species that we see encountered within historical record, we have to understand that a lot of the times that we're seeing these encounters, we're not looking at different humans. We're looking at the most, we are looking at another human, Homo genus, and species like a Neanderthal or a Denisovian, and the memories left of that at the most. Okay. But very frequently, what we're looking at is just different groups of people. When you look at things like the Fomorian and the Furbolg, I personally think that the Furbolg are probably Neanderthal. Probably. And why I think that is the description of the Furbolg and our knowledge, and the fact that I know now we know now that Neanderthals were here at least 30,000 years ago. It makes total sense that there's a possibility that there's some still, you know, kind of pushing their way west as the ice is receding, that lasts a little bit longer, and we just haven't found them. We now know that it's possible that Denisovian doesn't die off until 13,000 years ago, and that there's a doctor of paleoanthropology currently investigating reports that Homo florensis is still actually alive. So there might actually be another Homo species out there, right? So is it possible that the Neanderthal were still alive when the Celts pushed their way into the Celtic regions? Yeah, absolutely, right? Um, we know that what is referred to in the sagas as trolls is actually a slur for a specific group of people. So when somebody's name was half troll, it meant that they're one of their parents came from a specific indigenous group, right? And I do not want to equate the two in anybody's mind. But we know now that many of these verbiages that we see that indicated specific other species, and we're sitting here going, oh, they're writing about fantasies. What they're doing is attributing different attributes to other groups of either Homo genus or of other Homo sapiens, right? And because we know that now, it makes absolute perfect sense but all of these other things that we are told uh, are fantasy from stories absolutely exist at some point. When we look at all mythology throughout the world, when we look at all histories throughout the world, when we look at all oral traditions throughout the world, we often see that what has been taken as a fantastical rendering is maybe exaggerated a little bit in its fantasy, but is truly just an honest rendering of something that people mistake. Selkies. And somebody who was Finnic um, argued this with me, stating that the Finn people never had the legends of the Selkies, which to me proves this. But it is thought that it is currently thought that children of Selkies within the Scottish and or Scottish and Irish legends. So if you do not know, Selkies are seal maidens. They're basically the Celtic mermaid. Okay, and it is seal people who shed their skin when they come to shore, women who shed their skin and they'll sit on the shoreline and they'll brush their hair after shedding their skin. And if you can capture their skin, you capture the woman and you hold the woman hostage and you can get her to have children with you. If she ever finds her skin, she will leave, escape into the sea, and leave her children behind. I am the descendant of a Selkie. This is a family legend, and it's been known throughout history or believed throughout history that children of Selkies have webbing, uh, this fusion of joints or of digits. And I have on my right foot, not the big toe, but the first two toes are fused. My great grandfather has the same fusion. This is the line through which the Selkie line comes from. My oldest born has the same fusion. And it is a family legend of Selkies. When you look at Selkies, they were the children of Selkies were attributed to having this genetic trait. Um, it is now thought that the Selkies were the Celtic people's understanding of their interaction with the Finn people who at this time were using hide covered canoes or kayaks within this area and actually had a specific seal that has since been extinct uh, that was in a lake in Finland that has since become extinct. And they used to not only cover their canoes with this or their kayaks with this, but hide framed boats with this, but they would cover their bodies and, cover their full upper body, just as we see Arctic peoples do in all Arctic regions. And one of those other reasons that I totally understand why we can trace DNA back from Turtle Island over to Siberia, uh, that Arctic region thought process, anyways, right? So when we look at that, it makes total sense that the Irish people and the Scottish people not understanding that this was not a seal, right? In this sealskin canoe whose body is covered in sealskin, not understanding that differentiation or even understanding that differentiation and elaborating. We call the Picts because they tattooed their bodies from scalp to toe and the Romans named them the Picts. They were not Picts. That's the word the Romans used for them. So the Celts using the term Selkie for the Finnic people who adapted sealskin wear to travel the Arctic regions makes total sense. They could have absolutely known that they were absolutely just another human being. Then absolutely, if you steal a woman's hide-bound boat, right, hide-covered boat, and her entire gear, you're going to keep her. And if she can get away, she's going to go, right? Um, and so this makes total sense. When we look at all of the myths and legends, when we dig deeper into the oral traditions, into the histories of cultures, we understand that science proves them correct. Science does not disprove creation. Science does not disprove creation stories. It proves creation stories. It shows that creation stories are real. Nothing shows an omnipotent God scientifically. Even the creation story that we have regarding that deity does not show him as omnipotent, really. So that makes sense, but nothing shows an omnipotent deity within science. So that, I'm sorry, I cannot tell you works. But being fearful that the science somehow negates your faith or your belief is not only harmful for everybody involved, but the harm it does for you is greater than just the acceptance that nobody's telling you your creation story is wrong, just telling you that, well, okay, I will take that back. I am telling you that any creation story that tells you that the world is here for you to destroy is wrong. If your creation story tells you that it is all just a gift for you to destroy and literally gives you permission to destroy it, um, that I cannot ethically wrap my head around. I cannot ethically wrap my head around. So I'm not going to tell you that I don't believe that that's wrong because I absolutely believe that that's wrong. Uh, but he absolutely could have created you from just the earth like he created all the other animals, right? And like the Mother Earth created us from the earth. That's evolution in its nutshell. Creating you from all the other beings around there, creating you from the dirt, right? Molding you from the dirt is absolutely evolution in a nutshell. Everybody wants to know what our last common ancestor of everything was. And our last common ancestor of everything was an amoeba of some kind, right? It was a single celled organism. Because we are all just a part of this, right? We're all just energy. And when you look at it that way, you can absolutely see being created from the dirt. What is the dirt but a single celled organism, right? That combines to make up a vast organism that houses many other organisms. So once again, I am going to narrow down my scheduled lives to once a week on Wednesday at noon, Pacific Standard Time. I put that up on the website so everybody knows. They will be available live streamed at the same time on YouTube, so you can go back and watch them later if you cannot make it on that time. That does not mean it will be the only live I will be doing. It will just be the only scheduled live I will be doing. And I just find that, I was not trying to be an influencer. I'm not trying to create a social media presence. I'm not very much into social media. I was trying to get some information out, but this gives me this takes away the spoons that I have. And I want to put those spoons into other things. I have a children's book that I've been working on that's totally written. I'm just working on the art right now. And I have a few other projects that I'm working on. And if I'm not putting all my time into this, I can do that. And I can also do videos because if I'm putting so much time into this, I'm not really doing a whole lot of videos because I do the lives and then I check out because I don't like social media. I'm not a social media person. I do not like to interact on it. It really invites. I'm a very blunt, straightforward person. And a lot of people, many people love my personality and I love that, but many people feel threatened by it, especially people who might be stuck in a specific mindset and I come across as too mouthy or aggressive or smug because I'm always smiling, or any level of other things, and then I have to deal with all of that. And social media just becomes a lot for me. So I don't want to social media that much anyways. So I'll just be cutting it back to just one scheduled a week. It doesn't mean that I won't be in here for more stuff. It just means that I will only be in here for one scheduled. Um, and then I'm probably not going to stay for, I'm not going to be on too late tonight just because it's been a rough day for me too. So I'm going to go ahead and open up again to everybody for a hot minute so I can get any questions. We touched only a little bit on the skull behind me. Um, and so there might be some questions on that or any other things that we talked about. I know there's a couple more mods in now. I think that my poor child was working her little finger or their little fingers to the bone earlier. Happy Black History Month. It is like day 2, isn't it? No, day 1, isn't it? Yes. It is the start of Black History Month. I love February anyways, and so I'm really glad that February is Black History Month. There's so much beauty to that awakening period of time being Black History Month, right? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Um Actually, I've been watching as we go in. I was watching Will Smith's Amend, which was really good. Um, but today I actually started watching. There is a documentary that they did on uh, Tupac and Biggie's murders, and the lack of uh, closure, I guess, or lack of knowledge. And so I've been watching that today. Without even really realizing. I mean, I knew it was February, but I kind of like check out of everything so much. So I hadn't realized just how, and I have a sibling whose birthday is tomorrow too, and I had kind of checked out of the February scheme of things. Yeah, very much so. Well, and I mean, and we enter into it on the tales of what has just happened too, right? Which has just been just another trauma that has just it's just shattering. It's just shattering. So this is not actually a baby. This is 1 year and 4 months, 485 days old is what they know from the uninterrupted teeth in the because your adult teeth develop right up in here and behind the maxillary, like in the sinus cavity and the bones. And so they, as they're developing, they do rings like tree rings, and the growth rings in our teeth give the days. And so 485 days or 1 year and 4 months old. Okay, so that's my thought process. Nobody has evidence. That's me going, oh, I wonder on the fur ball being the Neanderthal. Um, that I want to make sure I clarify that. That is another one of my mind has gone off in a so I don't want to demean the thought process in any way because usually when my mind goes off in this, it's taking a look in a different way, and half the time it's proven right later on, like the southern boat route and things like that. But um, it is my mind taking knowledge that I have and what knowledge I have within the community and what knowledge I have here and go, oh, well, that could be that, but there's nothing else that states that. That's just my mind going, oh, that could be that, that works. Well, and it's more, I think, than that works. It's more of an understanding of how it relates, right? Like I had heard that or I had thought of that before I had found out that when we're looking at the sagas that the word troll indicates a specific group of people. Um, and so when I read new things, it just kind of doubles down on that. Like when we look at different, oh, that's fantasy things, it seems that it doubles down. Yeah, right. Like, and we've read a lot about like I've read a lot about like the Tuatha De Danann and the Furbolg and the different groups that peoples encounter as they go into spaces, right? But for the longest time, they really thought that Shield Maidens didn't exist, that that was a fantasy creation in the sagas. And then we find that the greatest warrior Scandinavia ever had was female, right? Educated rabbit tail theories. Oh, I like that. That's cool. Educated rabbit tail. Yeah, I like that. Because it's kind of what it is. It's like I mean, it's a different theory and nobody else is looking into it, but I didn't get it because I didn't know. I got it because I know things other people don't know, right? Like, it's like, nah, Well, and I truly feel like we're not all meant to know everything, right? People are like, you don't know this and you don't. Well, no, of course I don't. That's not what I'm studying. I'm not looking at that, right? Or like this baby, this ancestor Elise behind me, like, I didn't know of this. This came out in 2017 and they had found it like 3 years before. I didn't know of it until the other day scrolling through TikTok, right? Because I'm not trying to stuff everything in my brain. It would be a lot. I don't have energy for that. That's just a lot of shit, right? Um, and because I firmly believe, and the full quote is, "Jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than the master of one." Meaning that somebody that can look at several different trades and pull them all together can often understand things in angles that those who only have mastered one trade can understand, right? And so I firmly believe that it is looking at so many different trades and going into so many different spaces and growing up in so many different cultures and just all that mass of different, right? That never having that box that gives me the ability to see some things in a twist that other people might not see. Yeah. Well, there are a lot of bars around. There's a lot of blocks. There's a lot of blocks. And a lot of I don't believe in karma in the way that most people want to think of karma, but I do believe that we're all energy and that we're all intertwined energy. And because I believe that we're all intertwined energy, I believe that what affects me affects you and what affects you affects me. I believe that that's pretty much what karma states, right? But that most people don't really see it like that. And if they could see it in that base breakdown of an energy interchange, that they might understand a little bit better. I also believe that that means that absolutely that people can manifest things, right? Um, but I also believe that uh, I am a singular person, a singular entity, and so thinking, oh well, you should just manifest that is kind of stupid because as a singular entity, I'm trying to manifest against 8 billion other entities whose manifestation are often completely misaligned from my manifestation ideas, right? So I think that when we look at it that way, then we can understand that, well, I don't think that there's negative forces at work that try and silence, uh, you know, because as we're talking about this, and like I was saying, I'm watching this documentary. Um, there are so many voices that we've seen throughout history who have been silenced, right? So many big, powerful, positive voices that bring in such light that have been silenced. And oftentimes we kind of think of it as this forces of evil are working against, futuring of us or, the betterment of humanity. And I think that it's not necessarily like it's a force of evil. I think that it's necessarily that this is force of humanity's manifestation misalignment, right? Um, Up to 19% archaic DNA. What do you mean by up to 19% archaic DNA? And what group of West Africa? And we all have DNA from other species in us, if that's what you mean. My understanding isn't that there's 19% DNA in any other species in any of us. So that's a little bit confusing as to what you mean. Yeah, because see, I thought maybe you're talking about ghost DNA, but that's not 19%. Like, there's not 19% ghost DNA. Um, but we've all got, like, oh, I've talked about that. I've talked about that a few times, actually. Nobody has 19% Neanderthal DNA. The highest percentage of Neanderthal DNA is 5%, and the highest percentage of Denisovian DNA is 6%. You're mistaking ancestry's results that state that you have 19% more of this than the rest of the species does, um, which does not necessarily mean that's the percentage of your DNA. It means in comparison to the other population, you have more percentage of this than the rest of the population. Think of like, with children, how they do those height scales and they say that you're 90%, you're taller than 90% of the population. It doesn't mean that you're like 9 feet tall. It just means that 90% of 1-year olds are under, four or under 35 inches, right? Like it doesn't mean that at 36 inches you're a giant. It just means that you're, an inch taller than 90%, right? And we share 95% of our DNA with every other being on this planet. And of that 5%, that is unique to Homo sapiens, we share 99% with every other Homo sapien on the planet, right? So, Anon, I think that what you're talking about is that within the Oyo population, there is ghost species. There are three ghost species that we see within the Oyo population of West Africa. We also see ghost species within the Khoi people of South Africa, which is also the original population of Homo sapiens because they have the greatest genetic diversity. They have all the genes of Homo sapien within the Khoi people. Um, those are the only two populations that we don't see Neanderthal in. And we do see three ghost species in those two populations. We also see a ghost species in Indigenous Australians, as in on Australia, and in Indigenous Turtle Islanders. Um, I've addressed the ghost species. I've talked about the ghost species quite a few times. Um, woo! Apparently, I needed to throw people around. I've talked about the ghost species quite a few times. We can't figure out who the ghost species were because we don't have them in the fossil record. And until we have them in the fossil record, that's not true. That statement is actually categorically untrue. They can absolutely possess all the genetics of the Homo sapien species and therefore be the original population, and yet also have mixed with other species, just like every other person on the planet has. There's not a single person on this planet that doesn't have admixture from other species. Every single one of us has admixture from other species. Every single population on the planet, except for those two populations, has Neanderthal DNA. All of them. All of Africa, all of Eurasia, all of Turtle Island, all of Australia, all of it has Neanderthal DNA, except for those two populations. And in those two populations, we see those three ghost species, right? And they don't have Neanderthal DNA. They don't have Denisovian DNA, right? But they still have all the genetics for Homo sapiens. They have all of like, okay, so within a population, you'll see a genetic diversity within the population, a presence of different genes or genetic lines or genomes or genetic traits or different alleles, all of those things that make up the genetic diversity or the genes within our species. We have 25,000 genetics genes, 25,000 genes. Actually, we are not very genetically diverse for a species. Many species have quite a bit more genes than we do. But the Khoi people of South Africa have all of those 25,000 uh, genes, right? Um, and outside of that population, you see that that narrows as you go further out. Not attempting anything, Anon. I'm telling you the facts. All of it is on my website in widdaord.com under bibliographies. Not struggling. I've actually educatedly answered everything you've said, and you were coming up with not knowing jack shit and gave you the facts behind what you were talking about. So I'm not struggling at all. Yeah, my dad's 23andMe says he has more Neanderthal than 98% of customers, but it equals less than 2%. And I know the article that you're talking about. Um, the article that came out about the Oyo population. I remember that article. I've got it on the website that I'm talking about. It's on my website. Because you don't understand what it means to have ghost DNA. What you're stating is would state that basically you're stating that we couldn't be related to people who have Neanderthal DNA, or that those who have no Neanderthal DNA can't be original people. You're stating that those that have no Neanderthal DNA can't be original people. They're the only people who don't have Neanderthal DNA, the only two groups, right? So wouldn't it be more likely that they were the original? We all have different species in us, right? I know it's not Neanderthal, sweetheart. Yeah, absolutely, Afro. And I've stated several times to non, it's not African. You're just mixing the words around. I mean, you're trying to state that I am struggling when you're twisting things into something different and bringing up different things when I've already answered that and stated something completely different. So I'm going to ask you to open your ears and close your mouth and listen, because I've absolutely answered everything that you've stated in a way that you can absolutely understand. Um, Make sure I'm getting the right name. One second, I'm in the middle of doing something for somebody else, and I did just explain it like several times. So um, I need to fix this first, and then I'll go ahead and go over it again. And I'm only saying it because I did just say it to you. So, or only saying it like that because of that. So, one second. Got you, Dre. So, I didn't say anything different. So if you're just coming in and you haven't heard the conversation, I'm going to invite you to pause and listen to the conversation and hear what we're saying before you decide to question something that is based on two words that you've heard. Okay. The question is what about, and this is the Oyo population, OYO population of West Africa, who have, and the statement was 19% archaic DNA. And it's not 19%, and archaic isn't the right term. So currently, we know that as a species, we started 300,000 years ago. We know that we started in South Africa. We have found 6 other species in the fossil record, and then we have found 6 species through what we call ghost DNA. So, ghost DNA is DNA. Okay, stop and listen instead of talking. That was what the invite was, right, Anon? Instead of answering, instead of thinking of your response, if you want me to explain it, and I've explained it like 3 times in this live already and just explained it to you again and you didn't listen, you have to stop typing and listen, or I'm not going to explain it again. You're asking labor and then you're ignoring and being rude to my labor. So, we're not going to talk about that subject. I've explained it like 3 or 4 times in this live. Not going to go through it again. Tried, wasn't being listened to. The skull behind me again is a 13 million-year-old find in Turkana. And this is our newest understanding of an oldest ancestor. Between us, a common ancestor between us and our great apes. So, all of the descendant of great apes. A common ancestor is going to be something that different lines descend from. And so we know that this at 13 million years ago, in Africa, uh, there's been discussion as to whether or not the great apes start outside of Africa. We have a find at 12.5 out of Africa, and this one is dating further back and is that's dating further back, right? So this places the earliest great apes that we know of in Africa. This placing again an origin within Africa. Whichever, it never really matters, if the earliest apes come from Africa or Europe, though those trying to continuously push the Europe ideology are doing it for the idea of supremacy. Um, it doesn't really matter because all humans, all we are today, starts in Africa. We don't descend from apes. A lot of people get so offended by that. But really, Homo habilis is our oldest human, and Homo habilis is 2.5 million years old, right? Homo erectus comes on the scene at 2 million years ago. So then Homo erectus comes in at 2 million years ago, and Homo erectus really leaves Africa really fast. And all of these other species that we see in the fossil record and within our species come from Homo erectus leaving Africa. So currently we've found 6 species in the fossil record. And from first finding to last, what we have is Homo neanderthal found in the 1850s. Um, Homo Homo florensis found in 2003. Homo denisovian found in 2010. Homo naledi found in 2012. Homo longi found in 2020. And Homo luzons is found in 2020. So these are the 6 species that we see in the fossil record. Naledi is alongside us at the same time that we developed at 300,000 years ago in South Africa. Our current knowledge is that we don't develop from just one group within South Africa, but a wide, almost nation of several bands of Heidelbergensis and Erectus. And at the same time, Homo naledi is developing in this space. We haven't got DNA from Homo naledi, so it is actually possible that Homo naledi is a ghost species, though we don't see it in everybody. And if that was the case, it would most likely be in everybody. And that's one of the reasons that I don't think that Homo naledi is a ghost species. Of the ghost species, we see 3 in Africa. There are 2 species in Africa that do not have Neanderthal DNA, only 2 species, the Oyo people of West Africa and the Kwe people of South Africa. Within those 2 groups of people, we see 3 ghost species. We see a ghost species in Turtle Island Indigenous people and a ghost species in Australian Indigenous people. And then in the ancient DNA that we have from Neanderthal and Denisovian, we see another ghost species that we do not see in Homo sapien DNA. A ghost species is a species that left just a little flip, a fingerprint, a breath of their DNA in us. So, like, Turtle Island Indigenous people have 0.02 to 0.03% Denisovian DNA, which we know gives us a timeline of interbreeding between Turtle Island Indigenous ancestors and Denisovians of 10,000 years. So any percentage of DNA that we're seeing at 1% is giving an interbreeding pattern of at least 15,000 years. A ghost species is somebody that we mix with after we become a species whole, because if it's somebody that we're intermixing with as an originate, then it is going to be in all of us, okay? And it is not going to be a ghost species because it's going to be our species, okay? So if your mom's a Heidelbergensis and your dad's an Erectus and you're a sapien, you got Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis DNA in your sapien self. Okay. So a ghost species is a species after The group of Homo sapiens have that end up in the Levant for 100,000 years, mixing with Neanderthals, have moved out of the South African space that the Kwe people or the West African space that the Oyo people are within, and they have moved out and they are now within the Levant area, okay, or Upper Africa at this point in time. And you're seeing, not that the Levant was Upper Africa, but in these areas at this time. And so the Kwe people are staying in South Africa. There are other Homo sapien or Homo species at this time within South Africa. Like I was just stating, we've seen a Lottie up till 235,000 years ago, right? There are other species at this time. We just have not found them in the fossil record yet. And the same thing for the Oyo people in West Africa. There are other species at this time in this area. So after a group leaves, they're mixing with these other three species. As this group leaves, it's picking up Neanderthal DNA in the Levant. And then the people that are in the Levant are going back into Africa and they're carrying it back into Africa with them. And when they're carrying it back into Africa with them, this is why we see Neanderthal DNA in everywhere in Africa, except for the Kwe people and the Oyo people. And again, we see within the Kwe people that all of the genetics that are possible for a Homo sapien can be found within the Kwe people, which is why we know that the Kwe people are the original population. That is the explanation on it. I'm willing to go deeper if somebody has questions based on that. But only if you listened. If you argued the whole way through and I ignored you, keep arguing. Right? Like, I don't know what to say anymore. Again, I'm cutting back my scheduled lives to once a week. It does not mean I won't be in more than once a week, but social media is not my space. We don't know. So lumps of moss, we get over here at 33,000 years ago is the oldest known sapien currently, right? And so it'd probably be around that point of time. They haven't been able to trace, um, oh God, I haven't seen like an amount of the ghost species, like the amount. Most of the species that they've given off as ghost species, they haven't given the amount that they found in somebody's DNA. So I'm not sure what the amount is, and that again would give us that rating of how long they were mixing, right? But it has to be at least. So if we have, we know that the last migration out of Africa and the ancestors of everybody except for Australians, Indigenous Australians, and people who remained in Africa, that ancestry leaves at 50,000 years ago. So Turtle Island Indigenous people would have had to have left the Levant at 30,000 or 50,000 years ago and spent at least 10,000 years within Asia. And we know this for a fact through the DNA. They're currently investigating a southern boat route, which makes total sense to me. But in coming over, there is a gap, right? So that tells us 50,000 years ago, maybe 40,000 years ago, right? Maybe at the end of 40,000 years, they could have come over, but we don't see our first evidence here until 33,000 years ago currently, right? But we're currently pushing those dates back all the time. Um, Man, if I can find something, I'll have to see if I can find anything that gives the amount of DNA, and that might be able to give us a timeline of breeding of intermixing. I personally think, and we've talked before, right? A lot of these species that speciate from Homo erectus are cousin species that we're breeding with. Speciate with such small amount of species, right? Like Neanderthal species whole was only 500,000 over the 570,000 years of their existence, right? Um, so I personally am really starting to believe that when it comes to like the ghost DNA in Australian Indigenous people and the ghost DNA in Turtle Island Indigenous people, what happened is that when we got to these spaces, we just enveloped the populations that were there because they were so small already, right? So if you get over here in the species of Homo erectus that must have been here due to the Ceruti mastodon find, right? The species that speciates from Homo erectus. is here, you're probably not looking at more than 10,000 people as a species whole, if that. Like I would state that by that time, at 30,000 years ago, we're even seeing the Neanderthals and the Denisovians and all the other species that are still existing have really narrowed down their populations. So we could have ran into like as few as 10, right? Like we could have ran into like the last band of this group of people. And that's where we're getting that DNA, right? And it makes way more sense to me enveloping them, because also when we think about like the legends that we have here that talk about being created here, would have adapted those legends from the people that were created here, right? The Homo species that we had found when Sapien got here. And so adapting them in, then becoming the elders that are teaching the stories of this area, then becoming the people who are we're learning this space from, right, as we're entering in and becoming a part of, absolutely doubles down on that speciesization here, that creation here to me. This is Alessi is the species name. Neanthropithecus is the genus. Our genus is Homo, and our species is Sapien. So their genus is Nyanthropithecus, and Alesi, which is a Turkana word for ancestor, is the name of this being. Uh, Dana, RH positive and RH negative has nothing to do with the Anunnaki. Dana, no. And writing it in German isn't going to make me change that. No. Jag talar en svenska. Jag talar inte Anunnaki. Absolut. Nej. Okay. The first Homo sapiens, like Homo erectus, developed in South Africa, and to our knowledge today, they develop extremely dark of, well, not extremely, they develop dark of skin, tall and lean, because both of these things are protection from sun. Tall and lean dissipates heat better. Uh, uh, Heavier melanin blocks sun better. And we also know that they are speciating with 4C hair, are what we have designated as 4C hair, because 4C hair creates a shade over the skull and a lattice work where air can flow through so that it can cool the skull, just like Neanderthal speciates with larger noses and sinus cavities to warm the air before it hits the brain. Okay, I am going to go, guys. It's just too much. Again, Wednesday at noon starting next week. I'll probably be in randomly as well. But I'm going to be working on some other stuff to try and get some other stuff out. Um, and not spoon this. No life. The recent evidence shows that we have a last common ancestor with reptiles, but that we developed alongside reptiles. And so we are completely different. We do not have a reptilian brain. We actually have a mammalian brain. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm not leaving. I mean, I'm leaving tonight. I will be doing noon Pacific Standard Time Wednesday lives. That doesn't mean it's going to be the only one. I'll probably have a lot of time that I come in just to bullshit because I'm just in the mood, and or I'm trying to discuss things or talk things through that I'll come in. It's just that if I only have one obligatory one, then I put a little less into this and I put more into other things. Besides the fact that social media gets too hard for me. It gets just too much for me sometimes. So I'm not leaving. I'm just slowing it down a bit. Uh, so I'll see you guys next week on Wednesday. Uh, So I'm not going to be doing night times ones yet, but I do this on YouTube at the same time, which is the Widda Ord dot. So you can listen to them in the evenings. The website also has ways to contact if you have questions and you're not able to make it into the lives. You can absolutely contact me and ask questions, and I will probably text you back and have a conversation with you about the question. Um, uh, so you can absolutely, still get a hold of me, and everything else. So have a great night, everybody. Much love to you all. Have a great night if you're still on YouTube.